Welcome to the AI Standard Stack with me, Michael Mainelli, Director at Zien Group.
And me, Adam Smith, Chair of the AIQI Consortium.
Each episode on AI Standards Stack, we discuss developments in AI assurance with guests from around the world that are leading the charge on the standards, ethics, and regulation of AI. This episode is supported by Northeastern University London, part of Northeastern's global university network. Known for experiential education and high-impact research, Northeastern believes the best way to develop talent is to connect learning directly to the real world. From co-op placements and projects to AI leadership short courses and degree apprenticeships, its programs embed ethical and responsible thinking into every stage of professional development. As AI reshapes the way we work, Northeastern prepares people not just to use emerging technologies, but to lead with it thoughtfully.
Today on the show, we have Brian Ball, Professor of Philosophy at Northeastern University London. He works in the theory of knowledge, as well as philosophy of mind, language, and artificial intelligence. A Canadian and British dual citizen, he was educated at McGill University and then University of Oxford, where he was subsequently a lecturer at St Anne's and then Balliol College.
Well, welcome to the show, Brian. It's a real pleasure to have you on. We've known each other for quite a while and worked together on AI ethics and philosophy. But just before we unpack the stack, as we like to say, would you like to say a few words about how you got here? You certainly at a tender age when you were born did not say, "I wish to grow up to be a philosopher."
Well, sure, yeah, and thanks for having me on the show, Michael, and nice to meet you as well, Adam. Yeah, I mean, basically, I got into this space as an undergraduate. I was going to study biology, actually, in the sciences, and ended up taking a philosophy course in my first term. Got quite interested in that, and decided to major in it, switch into philosophy, and I did some other concentrations as well. So I had a minor in linguistics and a little bit of computer science and psychology as well at the time. That's an interest that persisted and brought me to the UK for graduate study. And I've been here now, came for a 2-year master's degree, and I've been here 25 years. So
Well, you teach a course on philosophy and AI at Northeastern, and I've had the pleasure of visiting you on campus. And your research has increasingly been involving the ethics and governance of AI. What's led to you and your team focusing on the technology in this way? Certainly, until quite recently, people would have said, "Well, it's just technology. Not necessarily it doesn't need ethics, but they're not really that relevant or important."
yeah, I would say there's really two impetuses, one from my research and one from the teaching side of things. And so on the research side, I was on research leave in 2018, I think, when the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke, and it sort of suddenly occurred to me that a lot of the things that I was thinking about, I'd written my doctorate about the nature of truth. You know, I'd published on the nature of knowledge and the ways of acquiring knowledge. And these were things that suddenly kind of had uh, broader societal interest, right, in the new um, uh, informational landscape that has emerged in this century. And particularly, I guess, that those digital media really were AI powered. And so I got interested on the research side that way. I wrote a paper called "Defeating Fake News" during that period, subsequently published, and began to do research on social epistemology using computational methods ultimately. And then on the teaching side, I was working at what was then New College of the Humanities. It's the same institution, but we're now part of Northeastern University's global network. And in, I guess it was 2019, that connection with Northeastern began to emerge. I became head of faculty in philosophy, and Northeastern was clearly looking to expand beyond humanities disciplines in the offerings that we had. And so I stuck my hand up and said, I'd be interested to facilitate the integration of psychology and computer science as two areas where I'd had some interest throughout my career, as I said, starting at undergraduate days. And so I developed some joint programs there, and in computer science in particular, set up this master's in philosophy and artificial intelligence, which is still going strong, and in fact, taking applications for September at present. But it's been a real boon. So
There's the advertising slot. So a lot on belief formation and misinformation dissemination that started you going. I can see that. This course, just can you give us a very tiny outline, philosophy of AI, but what are the sort of top 5 modules?
well, the program has undergone some shifts, but at the heart of it really have been a couple of core courses. So one of them is AI and data ethics, which I'm going to be teaching in the fall, and the other core requirement that's kind of specifically at this intersection of philosophy and AI is a course called Minds and Machines, and that really reflects something that we thought about in building the program, and actually I articulated with a colleague in computer science, Alexandros Koliousis, and I have a paper on training philosopher engineers for better AI, where we try to articulate what it is about bringing together these two skill sets that might be useful. And one of the things we wanted to emphasize is that, yes, there's like real value, of course, in embedding ethics into kind of the culture of AI development for AI engineers. And then the other thing was to kind of stress that philosophers also have some other skills and knowledge bases that are relevant to AI development. AI philosophy has been involved with AI historically from really the get-go, and we have expertise in areas like the theory of knowledge and the philosophy of mind, and indeed philosophy of language, germanely with large language models, right? Where we can think about things like what kinds of architectures might actually make further development and advancement possible in these tech spaces. So there's kind of two aspects of that, and those two courses on the program um, reflect that, right? Those pair of interests, I guess, that bring philosophers and AI researchers together.
Just building on that, could you give our listeners a real example of how a philosophy concept has changed how a system has been built?
Well, I mean, one thing that was kind of recently was some discussion of the role of metacognition in language models. So, well, the possible future role of metacognition, I guess, in language models. So metacognition is a notion that actually is kind of psychological, but philosophers are aware of it. Right? Philosophers of mind and cognitive science are aware of it and think about it. Right. One kind of worry, I guess, that people have had with language models is that they're prone to hallucination. They'll just say confidently something that don't actually have an evidence base to support. But one aspect of metacognition is to recognize, right? Metacognition is like cognition about cognition, or thinking about thinking, right? And so um, I guess the idea is knowing that you don't know something is a form of metacognition, and building in some checks on what the status of one's confidence is can be helpful in building a machine that answers questions, right? So that's the kind of thing that we might think about.
We'd like to get on to some of the things that you're both researching and some of your thoughts, but just before we do so, perhaps 2 quick questions, if I may, very quick. Who is this course targeted at? You mentioned engineers. Is it builders, is it managers, is it a frontier model specialists, or is it everybody?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, one of the amazing things to me, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but has been just the like diversity of backgrounds, professional and intellectual backgrounds that we've had on the program. We've had people in the program in every decade of life, from their 20s to their 70s. Some straight out of a philosophy undergrad. They're all primed up on philosophical knowledge, but recognizing that AI is the future, and it'd be good to get more specialist knowledge there. To people working in IT teams or software development teams who see ethics issues arising and they kind of want to engage, get a kind of conceptual foundation for thinking about the problems that they encounter, practical problems that they encounter. And like also artists, we had architects on the program. We've had quite a wide range of backgrounds, and we really anticipate people going on to do a pretty wide range of things as well. It might be embedding in a tech development team, but being able to speak articulately about what they're making to clients, say, or making policy advice. We just saw the head of the Australian AI Security Institute is now a philosopher, for example. So there's really a lot of as befits a kind of liberal arts education. There's lots of applications.
Have you observed one common characteristic of your students?
I mean, curiosity, I think, is the real thing. Curiosity and concern.
Yeah, the second area, as somebody who studied with, Quine, Putnam, Frith, Nozick, and also done some stuff with Mark Jason and Lenora Neal and all, I, I have an understanding of various bits, and you'll probably be touching on utilitarianism and value ethics and deontology and all of that. But is there either some guiding lights to you in the field or a theoretical framework you'd like to share with our listeners that is more common in this space than in general philosophy?
Uh, Good question. I guess my sense is, the field specifically of AI ethics is pretty new, right? And so, of course, there is grounding in ethical traditions in that space, right? And people do worry about, um, yeah, the kinds of theories that you talk about, and we teach those theories to our students, right? So that they can orient themselves. But you know, I guess I would say my colleague and I, Alice Hellawell, published this paper just less than a year ago on the 3D model of ethical AI practice, and there we actually build on, amongst other things, the work of a colleague in Boston, Jansu Janja, who's uh, convinced me at least that there's really kind of three kinds of considerations that go into ethics, right? One's around kind of welfare, or goodness of outcomes, I guess, right? And that has been traditionally the focus of utilitarian theories. Then there's also worries around dignity, really human dignity, respect for human dignity, um, and that plays out also with respect to, say, autonomy. People are free agents, right, that have an inherent dignity to themselves. So that needs to be respected. And then the third kind of aspect of ethics in general, and therefore in this space in particular as well, is about justice, right? The distribution of both really outcomes and respect, right? Those things need to be appropriately, fairly distributed. And so that kind of framing, I think, is quite useful when thinking about any area of ethics, right? It comes out of the research ethics space in the US context, but it applies to AI ethics.
Now, your 3D model is about design, development, deployment. That makes sense. You start with a thought, you wind up with a system working. Could you talk a little bit, as Adam was asking, uh, how do I, uh, you've identified those three stages, but what am I supposed to do at each stage?
Yeah, good. So I guess our idea here is partly responsive to a concern that began to be articulated in the early part of this decade, that, in the previous decade, there were some crises of ethics in relation to AI, and leading lights both in academia and industry started to articulate principles, and industry undertake commitments to those principles. But then somehow that didn't materialize in practice, right? And so there was a need to move from those principles into practice. And our idea really is that to do that, we wanted to take a lead from an area called value-sensitive design, where the idea is that the whole design process should have ethics embedded from the start, not as a kind of afterthought, tick box exercise that you do once you've made your product, whatever it might be. That applies, of course, not just to AI. But then thinking about the AI development process itself, we wanted to stress that it's like a cycle, and it can be seen at least as having those three phases, right? The design phase, the development phase, and the deployment phase, and that would loop back into potential redesign and redevelopment and so on as new data comes in the deployment context, right? Yeah.
But Brian, this is as you know, a podcast about standards, and we kind of our listeners and Adam and I are very interested in where ethical principles get represented in standards and for that matter, in regulation. You were on the steering group for the 695th Lord Mayor's Ethical AI Initiative when I was Lord Mayor, and we really appreciated your input. But one of the things that I'm curious about is one, can you have standards for ethics, or are they inherently in making people able to make decisions on behalf of others with ethical principles in mind? Those, can you program it is probably an interesting problem. The second thing is, are we representing them in philosophy? Could we have a ethical AI standard as we have ISO 42001 for responsible management? And the last thing, which you might want to touch on, is a bit of doublespeak. Certainly, so many government and industry and institute and academic documents open with, as is well known, here are the ethical principles, and then they just kind of throw it away and continue to do what they were going to do anyway. So it's just a kind of little nod of the head to the ethics and the principles, but no real embodiment in what they determine.
Yeah, great question. I have a few things to say about that. One thing is the kind of idea with our 3D model was that actually it would be really helpful for people. You don't need to be theory driven to be ethical, right? So you can actually engage with the ethical considerations without having knowledge of, say, deontology or what have you, so right, a particular ethical theory. And so we wanted to really just make sure that people were asking the right questions at the right stages of development, right? And so we had a series of high level questions, just two at each phase, and we thought, so I mean, the kind of idea is like, what are you making? What exactly are you making? That's one of the questions to ask at the design stage, right? And then in the development stage, how exactly are you going to make a thing like that? And make sure that you also think about why you're making those development choices in light of what you said about what you were making, right? Because you want to not lose sight of the objectives that you had when you're developing things, and allow for some slippage that would, you articulate a kind of ethical aim at the beginning, and then it drops by the wayside as you start to develop. So that was the kind of idea. It was meant to be sort of simple, right? Simple so that people could easily kind of internalize it in development teams, right? But we also, and really, I became much more acutely aware of this working with you on the steering group. That it's not enough, of course. Basically, if you want a culture of ethics amongst AI development teams, you need to support that at other levels, right? And so we say in the paper on the 3D model, there's two higher levels. One is kind of corporate governance, structures, policies, procedures, right? All of that can facilitate an appropriate culture within these teams. And then we also pointed to a kind of supra organizational level. And we focused on regulation, but I know you're an advocate for the role of standards, and I actually kind of wanted to throw the question that you asked me back at you and Adam. I mean, how do you think that standards can help to facilitate or incentivize compliance with ethical principles? And yeah.
Well, the problem here is we have to agree what standards say globally, and we don't agree on many things. This falls in the same category as societal concerns and human rights. It varies too much across cultures to really create international standards on this topic. But one thing the standards community has done is recognize that there are a lot of people out there claiming to be AI ethicists, whether they are people with a master's in philosophy or technology, or they're a communication specialist that's been on a one-day course. So we actually created in Europe a standard competence requirements for professional AI ethicists, which lays down all the minimum competencies, skills, and attitudes that a professional AI ethicist should have. And I think that's on the cusp of being published right now. It's a European norm.
Amazing. That sounds promising, and I hope you can draw it to my attention when it is finally passed and published.
Yeah, there is also an ISO standard on philosophy, which personally I think is pretty weak. It sort of says there's deontology, value-based ethics, and utilitarianism. There you go. But a lot more work needs to be done on that. Interestingly, in your question, one of the more intriguing projects out there, for me anyway, has been Anthropic's Values in the Wild. So they've listed 3,307 values. And my first reaction was, this is insane. On the other hand, as I've dug into it, I'm genuinely impressed. And I'm beginning to realize you got lots of sub values. So, for example, I don't know, take accuracy, right? Obviously, you'd like everything to be accurate. Well, actually, there's a trade-off between accuracy and time. So, if the person is there as you're lying on the roadside, the A&E comes up and says, "Oh, I'm just going to do this injection. Once I get it exactly at the right spot, it's going to take me half an hour, but I'll get it there." You begin to realize that you do have conflicts between these values. And the second thing, of course, is that it's unwieldy. There's no way anybody can keep 3,307 in their head at one time or weight them against each other or anything. This is an evolutionary process if you start with that quantity. But the British Computer Society, as you know, advocates the use of principalism for the introduction of new technology, that you need to really look at four principles: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, which you were sort of talking about. So you also get these sort of taxonomy wars. What I call trust, you call honesty. What I call transparency, you call explicability. And there are genuine differences in those terms. But then people come in fighting as so-called ethical experts. And I've got the right taxonomy, you've got the wrong taxonomy. And the poor bewildered person who asks an honest question is left more confused than helped. I mean, you see it, this is an evolutionary process that will get to something most people agree on, despite Adam's excellent point that there are different weightings and cultures.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, this is, I think, what I found so useful about Jansu's approach that I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
right, with these three kind of overarching principles. And I guess they would bring one of them, right, the one that I was calling welfare or well-being, that would bring together the beneficence and non-maleficence, right? And it's true that those are, of course, in some sense different. It's important to think about what good can be created as well as what harm should be avoided, right? When thinking about people's welfare, but having something like those overarching principles, to me, I think everybody actually quite universally is going to recognize those as important values. And you're absolutely right that there's further subordinate values under each of those. So things like privacy might matter to dignity, right? And transparency, right, might also matter to your ability to express your dignity with in the form of taking free autonomous decisions, right? And so, these kinds of things are related, and it doesn't surprise me to hear that a kind of list of names for ethical notions might expand to 3,000 odd different names, right? But I think they're all going to be variations on related to ultimately those three overarching.
I remember two quick stories on the Ethical AI Initiative. One was people talking intensely about the need for some type of explicability and transparency. And of course, the thought experiment was, okay, you go in to an MRI scanner, and rather than boring you with the actual doctor's interpretation or even the pictures. I'm going to go fully transparent and give you, the noughts and ones of each bit and byte that measured your brain scan. And you're like, well, what can I do with this? Oh, you've got everything you needed, you just
Yes, yes.
give you the skills to do it. And we worked out pretty quickly that autonomy pretty much covered that. Am I able to make a responsible decision on my own with what I'm being presented with? And if not, the other party, ought to do that. And we were, we had those, I think, really good discussions, which are helpful in terms of explaining it, but you can't let people kind of go off. And another good one is bias, where most of the people who seem to come into this field, almost the first thing is I'm going to write an AI system with no bias. And the truth is, there's always bias, and removing the bias is a bias. So it's an unachievable thing in the very first place. So it's not bias that you're after; it's after something else in terms of responsible decision making, etc. This, I think, leads into a question I'd like to ask you because you've done so much work on how beliefs form, and touching on the edge of the culture wars and divisions, the misinformation that disseminates within networks. Through your Polygraphs project, you might want to plug that a little bit. But are there lessons for developers and policymakers of AI to help guide? What can we learn from the information disinformation wars that applies to AI and the hallucinations and the thing that you raised earlier?
Yeah, great question. There's lots, of course, to say about that. I mean, I was going to say already when you were talking about the trade-off between sort of timeliness and accuracy, right? That is one of the things that actually the Polygraphs project has uncovered. So Polygraphs is a computational project for philosophy and specifically for social epistemology, or the theory of knowledge in communities or groups. And we use simulations of communities of agents who are basically talking to one another. They may be talking to one another in person or online or whatever, but they have some channels of communication, and so we represent those communities as networks of agents. Yeah, one of the kind of initial findings is that even in the absence of any misinformation, we can get a kind of a trade-off between just people uh, communities, I guess, really converging on an erroneous assumption, conclusion sometimes. Right, that's one kind of risk, but there's another kind of risk, which is that they just take so long, they're so cautious that they might take so long to end up believing the truth that they can't really act on it, and that's potentially problematic. I was thinking of climate change in that context. Right, this action is needed quite urgently, and there's been a kind of disinformation strategy, I think, around just trying to suppress the emergence of a consensus, right, on what to do. And so, that trade-off is real. In general, value trade-offs are real. And I guess with the kind of specifics of what you're asking about, I mean, what we do is we model our agents as thoroughly rational, right? They receive information and they update their beliefs in a rational way, and they take actions on a rational basis, right? And what we find is that there are nonetheless ill effects of mis or disinformation. When there's more misinformants in the community or more disinformants in the community either gets it wrong more often, right? Ends up at a false conclusion more often, or just takes a lot longer to arrive at a correct conclusion than they would otherwise. And so, we think, given that the agents are all rational, you can't blame their biases, right, or their irrationalities because they don't have them, right? And so, to paraphrase Bill Clinton, it's the environment, stupid, right? It's specifically the informational environment that's problematic. And of course, we've seen lots of examples of unrest being promoted in communities in Britain and elsewhere through the dissemination of misinformation. So, I think, and I guess the last thing to say really is just that um, given that the agents in our models are behaving appropriately, they're rationally sensitive to the information that's available there to them. Um, we shouldn't expect that it's going to be just individual measures that help address this problem. We're in fact going to need something like policy proposals or corporate decision making about how, say, online platforms operate, right? To share information, right? What ways they proceed, how the algorithms function, and so on. And some of those considerations also go into, of course, the construction of chatbots based on LLMs and so on. So yes, there are transferable kinds of considerations. It's of course subtle to figure out exactly what a given insight, how that translates into practical interventions. But I think it's clear that interventions are going to be needed, not just on the part of individual information consumers, as it were.
A couple of questions on the research. First of all, is it possible to design a system that detects or corrects misinformation without it becoming the judge of what is true? And secondly, did the size of the agentic network have any effect on it? For example, did it make it slower or faster? Does a larger network make something that's easier to capture?
Yeah, so one of the nice things about, I mean, on size, one of the nice things about our framework is that it's scalable. So, a lot of early work in this space was done on very small networks, and these the kinds of trade-offs I was talking about arose in really quite small communities, sort of 10 agents talking to one another. We've run simulations on networks with tens of thousands of nodes and so on. And of course, that does affect time, right? How long it takes in fact, on those larger networks, we're not seeing a consensus emerge in a timely manner, but we do see people's confidence in the truth collectively rising over time if conditions are favorable for that. So yeah, size does matter, but it's not the only thing, right? Crucially, some of the structures of the network, basically the shape. We actually talk about shape mattering in one of our papers on this topic. And so, one of the aims of the research really is to try to tease out what are the likely factors to contribute to truth conduciveness in these contexts. I mean, about machines being the judge of truth, I mean, that does seem potentially dystopian, right? Given as yet they don't really have world models and the like. But that's not to say that there can't be things. I don't think there's a deep problem about the idea of there being a judge of truth, right? That judge is human. I mean, we have it in defamation law and in false advertising law and so on, right? There are cases where we think it can be established what's the case, what's true, and that can be germane to normative consequences, right? So, and I guess just one last thing I'll say is actually one idea that I kind of like is come from a researcher in Oxford and a team that he's involved with that I met Michael through the steering group. Chris Summerfield has a paper with colleagues about the Habermas machine, and there he's got an LLM that is acting as a kind of moderator for discussion and usefully kind of synthesizing what others are saying and not glossing over the disagreements, but actually putting them back and summarizing them, and that facilitates kind of reasonable discussion. Right? The study there is like early stages kind of thing, but it's the kind of thing that I think could be promising for encouraging rational debate about issues that matter, using some tech.
You got me thinking about the notion of having a standards for the ethics of standards. It's quite quite an interesting area. I'd like to move, if I could, in the time available, briefly over into another E area, economics, and the boundary between ethics and economics is an intriguing one. In fact, one of my favorite reads is Scarcity and Evil by Vivian Charles Walsh, which is a uh, much maligned text in some regards, but actually to me is quite deep. It points out that all these decisions are made under conditions of scarcity, whether it's information scarcity, time scarcity. I want to do the ethical thing, but the ethical thing is to knock on 450 million doorsteps and tell them what I'm doing. Well, that's there's some real problems in the ethics of it, uh, and economics is imbued totally with ethics. And in fact, the whole bit about justice, the example you often give in justice is, I've got a vaccine that will solve the problem, but it's $500,000 a pop. So I can do a lot with $500,000 to help alleviate other things. So money, resource matters. Now, in this, we're seeing a lot of resource wars, energy, data centers, tokens. The field has boomed. And the week that we're recording this is the very week that America decided to restrict access to the latest models for security reasons, perhaps, but potentially for economic reasons. We don't know. I am very curious here about access to tech, the democratization of it. And how do you see that as an ethical issue?
Yeah, another nice question. I mean, I guess I think I'm in favor of democratization of access to tech, and I think also, I mean, the example that you point to suggests that there is a real need for some AI sovereignty, right, that there needs to be more control, local control over what tech's available. And so, I mean, just to kind of relate this back to the ethics side, right? I mentioned um, that we do need this distinction between kind of beneficence and non-maleficence, but all of that goes into this question of the overall welfare that's kind of created, and um, there's a lot of worry about harms, and that's only appropriate. But there's a lot of upside potential as well from AI. It seems to me. Just I'm thinking of things like the DeepMind team that won the Nobel Prize for their work on protein folding using AI. Right, that's going to have health benefits down the road, right? So there's a lot of beneficence kinds of considerations that AI can really support. And I think that means, there's this debate in kind of the future of work around automation versus augmentation. So those that talk about automation think of tasks getting automated, and then the labor that goes into that can be replaced, and that can make efficiencies, and you can produce the same good, but for cheaper, right? But there's another way of thinking about the future of work, which is that the tech will actually enhance or augment what people are able to do, right? So give them the same human resources, right? If you've got the right skill set in the population, right, and in the workforce and in the citizenry, then that will enable more good things to be brought about. And I guess I kind of want to emphasize that, and I think that really requires some AI literacy, and not like a reasonably deep kind of AI literacy. Maybe, I mean, it's one thing to kind of know this sort of quasi-monopolistic company will provide you with this product, and it differs a little bit from that other quasi-monopolistic company's offering, right? But I think actually having the ability to build your own pipelines and so on, right, and know what tools are actually needed for what tasks, that's really valuable. And so I guess I'd like to see, and I think there is opportunity for that, right? There's lots of tech that can be downloaded locally and used locally if you know how to do it. So I'd love to see that happening more.
Question on that. Open models put more capability in more hands. Does that help democratize AI, or does it spread risk?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Talked about it with a colleague in my computational philosophy lab at Northeastern about this, and I think he's a little more concerned than I am on the spreading risk side of things. I was involved with a conversation at the Swiss Embassy here in London not so long ago, where there's a lot of discussion of their model, Apertus, which is open source and open weights and open data, I think, right? So very, very kind of open. And I guess I see a lot of potential upside to that. Um, you know, there are real risks. Another colleague was drawing my attention to the I think the model card for one of the big tech models, where they actually go in and explain in some detail how exactly they have stopped their LLM from revealing information about how to make nuclear weaponry and so on, right? And so, that does seem an important thing to do. Um, uh, how exactly to thread that needle or navigate that space?
Brian, we've run kind of to the edge of time, but very quickly, I mean, just a sort of a closing question. Is there an ethical question that you think people in the AI space should have first and foremost in their mind?
Uh, that's a tough. What's the top priority question in AI ethics? Um, yeah, I guess. I mean, maybe this is just inspired by this kind of conversation we've been having. But maybe the thing to really be thinking about is what is the actual benefit that you can produce through the use of AI techniques that you couldn't produce otherwise. What like can you um, process large data about how your organization uses energy to like improve climate outcomes, or right? What are the big things that you can do better because of the inferential power that AI brings? Right, there's a lot of focus on harms, and I don't want to downplay that, but I think it's good to think not just about like what the financial return can be from an innovation, but actually what the good can be that's produced.
Well, it's a good unifying answer, economics and ethics, and it's all about effectively benefits over costs. And yeah, that is very good. Brian, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. They're really quite deep and profound. I'd like to thank also, as ever, my co-host, Adam Leon Smith, and to all of you for listening to the show. And join us next time for when we cover the full stack of AI standards, ethics, and regulation. Thank you.